Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Story Darlings podcast. That's Tara.
Hi. And that's Sandra.
Hello. Today, we are talking about A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. And when I tell you I have been looking forward to this day that Tara reads A Court of Silver Flames and we get to talk about it, that would be an understatement. So I am so excited. This is probably my favorite book in the series. And we are going to be talking about the first 37 chapters. Tara, just what did you think overall about the first half of the book?
Well, I enjoy Nesta like something fierce. And I enjoy Cassian. And so being able to see them together, both in kind of their element of Nesta being feisty and Cassian being playful, I loved it. Like the last books were Feyre and Rhys's story, and don't get me wrong, I love me some Rhys too, but I don't know. There's just something about Nesta and Cassian and seeing their story.
It's a different kind of spice, a different kind of snarkiness to their dynamic, right? So if you are just tuning in, last week we talked about A Court of Frost and Starlight, which was such a feel-good holiday type of book where we got to see all the characters just kind of sit with the holiday and Feyre's birthday. And it was a setup book for the rest of the series. So now we're going to talk about Nesta's story. And I guess this one starts out with a prologue. And you want to talk about what that prologue kind of feels like?
Yeah, that prologue is kind of a step back into the past with Nesta going into the cauldron. Like, I think it's like a kind of PTSD, like remembering of what happened to her and her clawing the parts out of the cauldron and being Nesta and not being willing to take a negative without putting her spin on it a little bit. And so she clawed a little piece out of the cauldron. And yeah, it's just her kind of taking that step back.
It was so cool seeing this perspective on it because, you know, in the previous book, whenever the sisters were dunked into the cauldron, it's all Feyre's POV, right? And then this one, it was so interesting being in Nesta's head, just seeing her take on it because she was ruthless, right? Like she did not go down without a fight. The King of Hybern had called her a hellcat. And then we just got to kind of experience what she went through being submerged into this black, cold, cold water that was just depthless, right? There's no bottom to it.
We also see a little bit of a different take on what that meant because in the past we've seen her steal something from the cauldron and her being in her own element of feisty, but we hadn't seen what that took from her. We've seen like Elaine kind of battle with her whole being a fae, but we haven't really went into Nesta's, like what Nesta lost. We've only seen bits and pieces of what people thought Nesta gained. Like we haven't seen her be vulnerable because of that. And now we're getting to see the vulnerable side of Nesta that she wants to keep hidden with everything in her being.
So after the prologue, we are plucked into current day, and Cassian has been tasked with fetching Nesta from her crappy apartment across town. And tell me about how this scene plays out.
Well, I would like to point out that her crappy apartment across town, where she is like burying her like sorrows in sex and alcohol. And so Cassian is, you know, visiting her to get her to come back. And Nesta is feeling very betrayed that everybody is listening to Feyre and not taking into account what she wants at all.
You get so much sisterly resentment toward Feyre in this one scene. No, the scene is so funny because Nesta literally has a fae male over and she's trying to be secretive about it. And so the whole time Cassian knows, he can smell everything that's going on and he's making all of these little snarky comments at her like, oh, I guess they don't care that you haven't washed your sheets and there's the scent of multiple males like in your bed. And she is just shameless about it. She's just like, yeah, what so? And At one point, she tries to get the mail to like sneak out of the window, and then Cassian goes to leave really quick, and she knows that he's just like perched on the street to try and see this guy's, smooth escape. And it's just a funny scene. Like, she has so much anger about how things are going right now, but it's so funny.
I get the sense that the guy also wanted the like quick escape because he knew who was at the door. And so there is quite a bit of fear that we see in everybody in all of these towns. Like a healthy fear, but also respect for Cassian, Rhys, and Azriel. And so every time they walk into a scene with like a normal person, they're all like, holy crap. They're like the like celebrities of the cities right now. So
Definitely. They're the royalty, the leaders of the country. It's so funny to see people react to that. And so Nesta is not happy about being summoned and being expected to go to Feyre's new house. So Frost and Starlight, Rhysand had just got her the estate, and they were going to do all this rebuilding and remodeling about it. And so now the estate is done. And so this is where it's basically an intervention meeting, right? So Cassian finally hauls Nesta back to the house, and she was walking in, and she's just taking all of the decor in and the paintings on the wall, and it's just, she's so hateful and resentful about everything in this house. And she walks into the room, and it is definitely an intervention.
Mm-hmm. Okay, nobody hate on me. But in the first half of this book, I am not fond of Rhys. Like, it's like he has zero patience for her, zero understanding that what she is going through is her own turmoil. All he can see is Feyre's side to what's happening to this person. And, like, I have, like, very little patience for that. Like, I get that, like, Feyre is being impacted by Nesta not wanting to have anything to do with anybody, but Rhys hasn't grasped why Nesta doesn't want to have anything to do with anybody. Like she's like in her own like world of pain, and all Rhys can see is Feyre's side, and that Nesta is hurting Feyre. And I'm like, I get it. It's a morally gray man who like will burn the world for his mate, but yeah.
It's like we started sensing this shift in Rhysand. I don't know if it was the previous book, Frost and Starlight, or maybe the book before, but he starts getting like very impatient with Nesta. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Feyre has been endlessly patient with Nesta and very accommodating, and she's always like telling him to pipe down and like, relax a little bit about it. Yeah. And he just won't. I'm with you. Like, he kind of started losing brownie points with me. I know that no character is perfect. It's what you said, the gray area, like we're all, a mix of everything. But yes, I was very annoyed with him in this book. And so Nesta walks into this room, and it's like Rhysand standing there with his arms folded, and Feyre sitting on the little settee, and then Amren is there. There was a huge fallout with Amren because we've always seen them be BFFs in previous books. And so Amren is not happy with Nesta and being kind of bitchy to her too. And so Nesta has to feel very ganged up on, I guess. Like she hasn't been acting right, but she feels very ganged up on.
Well, yeah, she hasn't been acting right, but I think that there's very little put yourself in my shoes. Like, everybody was concerned about Elaine when Elaine wasn't talking, but Nesta had to be concerned about Elaine, so she like took it on herself, right? And nobody really gave a shit about Nesta because Nesta like seemed strong. And this happens in like the real world too. The person that seems the strongest gets the least amount of help, even if they are fighting a battle themselves. And I think that happened through the last books to the point where Nesta couldn't do anything, and nobody seems to be giving a shit. They're like, well, you should be doing it our way. But they didn't make they didn't make Elaine do it their way. They were patient with her and tried to like find ways to help her, but they're not doing that for Nesta.
Totally. I think that the way that Nesta handled some things in the previous book, whenever she just slaughtered the King of Hybern after Elaine had stabbed him through the throat, she never gives off the facade that she is weak in any way. She's very much over compensating for that side of her. So it's almost like a part of her did it to herself, like in my opinion, but I totally understand. And so this at this intervention, everyone is kind of trading barbs. And what sets all of this into motion is, as you said, Nesta has been having sex, going to the bars, drinking a lot. She is racking up quite the tab and charging it to their account. And it is not a good look for the leaders of this city.
Yes. And the most recent tab was very hefty because she paid off some like gambling debts of some people. And like, I think she bought like alcohol for the whole bar or something. Like, it was a hefty. And Feyre's like, this is embarrassing for me. So we're going to need to do something different, okay? And so Feyre and Rhys are like, we're going to send you to train with Cassian. And, you know, it's either that or you go back to the human world, because right now, like, that's what we've got. And so I guess they did show her a little bit of patience because they were letting her like charge things and they were trying to give her time. But I think that there were ways that they could have helped before this point. But either way, like, so she gets to go train with our resident hunk, Cassian. And she's not happy with this because she doesn't like to be given an ultimatum of you will do what somebody else says. She is very much her own person and doesn't want to be bossed around, which I think is a part where she hurts herself because her attitude just doesn't like lend well to people trying to help her.
No, she's definitely of the mindset where she is not willing to bend at all, to the point that she will snap. And so they kind of pose 3 conditions for her to be able to remain at Night Court, which is you don't have an apartment anymore. Like things are getting packed up right now. You are going to live at the House of Wind, where no one except the people with wings and who can winnow can want to live.
And so she can't get out either because she doesn't have wings to get out.
If she wants to get out, she has to go down and up 10,000 steps, which are like steep steps as well. It's like very narrow steps and steep.
I couldn't even make 100 like without wanting to die. So.
Which neither could Nesta, apparently, as we see in a scene. But she is to live at the House of Wind. She is to train with Cassian at Windhaven, Illyrian-style. And then at the bottom of the House of Wind, we know that there is a 7+ level library, and she is to work there, following Clotho's rules. So it's those 3 conditions. Nesta is not happy about it. And then he kind of whisks her away.
And to kick her while she's down, Elaine is the one like packing up all of her stuff. So like the one sister that she has fought to protect over everything else, she feels has sided with Feyre over her. And so Nesta is peeved because she's done everything for Elaine that she possibly could. And she feels like Elaine is also betraying her.
Oh yeah, 100%. All of this is happening, and Cassian is tasked with settling Nesta into her new daily life. And she kind of seems like a grumpy teenager in this scene where she's like plopped into this place, which the House of Wind is awesome because it pretty much does everything for you.
Freaking A, that house is so like it gives her smutty books. Like she doesn't even have to go buy books, guys. Like the house just provides them for her. It makes her food.
Bath.
It makes her baths. And yeah, I want this house. Like, where can I find Rhys if for nothing else besides this house?
It was so funny, like the dialogue, because there's a scene where Cassian was communicating with Rhysand about how Nesta's been settling in. And he's like, oh yeah, she immediately took a nap when we got there. And it's something like 14 hours later or something. And Rhysand's just like, she is still sleeping. It's just totally just grumpy teenager getting forced to do something that she doesn't want to do. And so she's going to fold her arms and act like a brat the entire time. And then we don't really see a lot of like Moore. Like Moore has been tasked to help winnow to and fro, but she has been off, like she has been kind of suspiciously off page a lot, just kind of doing her own thing, right?
Well, she got sent to Vallahan or whatever that place is called. to kind of covertly see if they would be willing to ally with the Night Court if another war broke out.
Yeah.
But we also see some other intrigue going on because we get a little bit more of the blood rite, and Cassian telling us a little bit about that. And he also tells us that Callan died in the blood rite. And so, shucks, yes. So through this book, we hear that the blood rite is basically a Hunger Games style, like trek up to the top of this mountain. And there are 3 levels of survivors, of winners, which are the people who survive everybody else trying to kill them. And if you made it, like, just survived, I forgot the levels, but like you were 1 level, right? You were level 1. It had a name. I don't remember what that name is. If you made it to the mountain, but not to the top of the mountain, you were the 2nd level of survivor. And if you made it up to the top, you were like the elite fighter. And that is what Azriel, Rhys, and Cassian are. It was something like only 5 people had done that in like 500 years. And like 3 of those are Rhys, Cassian, and Azriel. So it's very elite. Very elite. And they kind of stacked the deck against Azriel, Cassian, and Rhys too, because they had intentionally separated them in their blood rite to like make it easier to kill them off, basically. And instead, what they underestimated was their need to find each other, and that they would kill anything and everything in their path to do it. And another thing that was interesting with what we found out is there were no weapons and no magic. So it wasn't like Rhys had like a leg up because he's the most powerful Fey male in Corinthian history, because he couldn't even use that. And Azriel couldn't use his siphons or, so just shows you how much of a team they are, but also how powerful they are in their own rights without magic.
This is their sacred mountain to the Illyrian culture, and its name is Ramiel, the highest peak, which it's like if they survive the week and they do get to the top, they like touch a mysterious stone, like a monolith, they said, which was, I don't know.
It like kind of teleports them out of there.
Did it remind you of anything or kind of feel like anything else?
Well, no, tell me.
So when the second time I read this, I was like, oh my God, okay, so spoiler alert, we have Throne of Glass series episodes. So if you haven't read that series, you might want to close your ears right now. But in that series, there's a clock tower, and it's kind of like this word gate, right? And so I don't know, when I think of like this black stone and this monolith thing that can transport people, that's kind of like what it made me think of on the second read through of the book. So I'm just like, what is going on? But
I can see that.
I know. It's like Sarah J Maas is kind of building all of this lore around Ramiel and their sacred mountain, and I want to know where it's going.
We also get multiple mentions in this book of falling through. Like Nesta mentioned that she was holding on for dear life to Az and Cassian when they were winnowing because she didn't want to fall through like worlds. And again, call back to Throne of Glass. That is exactly what Aelin did, is fall through worlds. And so like she's building up these like repetitive, even through book series things. And so again, I think she's gonna combine these. These are all gonna be one series, I think.
We meet a character later in this book, Gwyn, who starts talking more about like how Meryl is researching this idea that there's multiple worlds stacked on top of each other. So it's all like leading us down this road, and it'll be fun to see how this plays out. But yeah, so Nesta's settling into the house. She's suffering from PTSD real bad. She refuses to have any kind of fire lit if she's cold, because as we talked about before, it reminds her of bone snapping. She has a lot of resentment and just pent up emotion about her father. And we start seeing glimpses of this mother relationship. Tara, I think you made a comment like way back in the first book when we started covering this. You're like, I know Sarah J Maas, and she always starts like kind of weaving these little threads, like putting that out there. And there's going to be something more about the mom. And you definitely get that vibe with how Nesta describes her mom. Like, it could just be an unhealthy relationship because she obviously favored Nesta, right? And Feyre never knew her. But there's definitely something off about it.
Yeah, and she called, like, so basically the mom favored Nesta because Nesta was smart, in her opinion. And
Cunning.
like, yeah, and so she was going to be able to basically, what I got is trick a good man into marrying her. Whereas whereas Elaine would be able to get a good man because of her looks. Like, Elaine was the doll and Nesta was the brains, which is very way of looking at your children.
Yes, like her mother's words, it was my cunning little queen, like you will be about conquest. And it almost reminded me of Elaine's seer kind of verbiage, right? Just kind of the language that she uses. I don't know. And the way the graphic audio too did the voice, it was just so, there's definitely something off about
Like
it. And so I wonder, it makes you wonder. And I think you mentioned the fates before, like the three sisters. So it kind of just makes you wonder, like, where this is going, right? With the sisters. Yeah, for sure.
And then, so back to like what we learned about like the intrigue that's going on at the court. We also find out that Eris is back and he is like forming a little bit more relationship with Kier. And so everybody's a little bit nervous on like, okay, are you still on our side? Are you like, what's going on? And we do find out that Eris has been keeping Kier away to protect more. So again, I called out that when he wouldn't touch more, like everybody else, indicated that it was a bad thing, like he wouldn't touch her. But I think that there was something going on there. Like the words that he used, I think that there was something more. I think he is like aware maybe of what more was and like didn't want to force something on her that she wouldn't want, and so like because he also called out that he knew why she went to Cassian, which was to break the marriage betrothal. And so I think that there's something more with Eris still. I think he's like playing some psychological games to end up helping in some ways. I don't know. It's kind of like Jurian too. Like he was playing both sides, but like very close to the best. And so I think personally, Eris is a good guy.
I mean, he's definitely, yes, he's definitely embracing the morally gray, like if you're going to paint me a villain, sure, I'll own it type of thing. And from what we know about the Autumn Court too, which he is the oldest son of, they will ruthlessly kill their siblings to be able to inherit the throne too. So a part of you has to wonder if some of his behavior is to kind of cement his place at court too, to discourage his siblings from thinking him weak.
We do find out that like the heir isn't necessarily like the oldest son or even a son. Like sometimes it bypasses the children completely and goes to like a cousin or whatever. So like even with all of their like shenanigans, killing each other and whatnot, they may still not be the heir, which is funny to me. Like all the work you did and it could still pass you over.
Yeah.
So Nesta, back in like training grounds, Nesta being the bitch that she is, refuses to train with Cassian, knowing and intentionally embarrassing him in front of Devlin and everybody else who had just made comments about her being a woman, and they would sanitize the weapons after she was done and shit like that. She intentionally embarrasses him, like. And I'm like, come on, Cassian's so sweet. He's doing his best. He was ordered to do this. Come on, Nesta. Like, I get it, but I don't.
She is such a princess in this scene. Just like perched on the rock, I'm not going to do it. Part of it is like embarrassing him and trying to show him who's boss. And the other part of it is her pride, right? Because she knows how out of shape and incapable she is right now. And she doesn't want anybody else to be keyed into that. And so it kind of just flashes between seeing how Nesta is at this Illyrian camp for training, seeing what she does in her free time at the House of Wind, where, by the way, Cassian and Azriel are both staying at the House of Wind. So she has these two hot roommates, right?
Well, and Azriel is the chaperone, which is hilarious to me. I feel like you wouldn't be much of a chaperone. Like, it would be fine. And like, I even think she does like hint a little bit at she'd be open to a threesome with Azriel and Cassian.
She has
like
a fantasy about it. Oh, this book. I mean, it starts off, it's like chapter 15 or something. She has a fantasy three-way with her, Cass, and Azriel. And then it's like a few chapters later, there's some tension, hallway tension, after she first tries to descend the stairwell to go out on town because she wants some release, right? She wants to go to the bars and do, her pattern that she's been doing these last several months, maybe a year. I forget how long it's been. And so this whole predicament of Azriel playing chaperone in a house where Cassian and Nesta are very much
sexual
attracted.
tension. Like, it's not even like you could cut it with a butter knife. You could cut it with like air. Like, yeah. And I think Rhys even makes a comment. He's like, I don't know what you guys are doing up here, but like, it smells like sex. Like, horribly. and yeah.
Sarah J Maas did not, she had too much fun writing these scenes, like the dining room scene with Nesta, yes. And it becomes kind of like this game between the two of them. They're like, oh yeah, I'll help you out. And the next time they help each other out and they're just like teasing each other.
Well, Nesta even like low blows,
That's what she said.
Well, she blows him too. But anyway, low blow with Cassian the first time. She's like, oh, that was quick, basically.
No, the scene where he creamed his pants.
Yes. She's like, well, that was quick off the draw or something like that.
And then she just walks away.
Ouch. And he thinks about that for like 4 days afterwards. And he's like, it was just so funny, but also like secondhand embarrassment for Cassian right there.
I mean, this book is filled with scenes like this, just sexual tension and humor and teasing. And I think that's part of what makes this book so fun to read. I mean, there are other interesting things too, like Nesta's journey and what she tries to do is really inspiring, I feel like. And you definitely see a lot of growth with her already in the first half of the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
It's cool seeing her perspective of all of these priestesses in the library because she sees how scared and timid they are.
She sees herself.
So what does she do?
She like starts to befriend them and like see her story in them where she was taken advantage of. We get another like flashback with her and Thomas. So she went to him for help and he's basically like, no, you're not worth it. And so she breaks off the engagement and he basically tries to force himself on her. And so as she's like hearing the stories of these priestesses who basically were raped and beaten and tortured and whatever, she is thinking back to her life and what has previously happened to her, and where her strength comes from is always being a fighter in those situations and always wanting to hold safe face, basically. Like, she doesn't want to tell anybody that happened because then she has to admit that she has a weakness somewhere. So basically she's like, you know what? I'm being a coward by not being willing to face that, like, I have weakness. And I'm judging everybody else by their weaknesses and being hypocritical. And so her befriending these priestesses kind of show her a little mirror of herself.
We also learned that, like, Nesta, out of the three sisters, was the only virgin until she started her pattern of just sleeping with randos from the bar and drinking and stuff too. Like, she just did it to get it out of the way. Whereas we learned that Elaine slept with Grayson, which hurts even more considering how he treated her. It's just, oh, poor Elaine, you sweet, sweet child.
Yes. And I get very confused because Elaine is the middle child, Nesta is the oldest, but I get older sibling vibes off of Feyre.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's technically the baby, but she feels like she's been put responsible for everything. And so, like, I keep forgetting that Elaine is not the baby.
Yeah.
I get older sister vibes off of Nesta, but I get baby sister vibes off of Elaine. And so then when they're like, oh, middle child, I'm like, wait, what? Like, she acts like the baby.
Yeah, in my head, it's like Feyre, Nesta, I just get middle child syndrome just because I have two sisters. And then, Elaine being the youngest. That's how I always feel it's in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that with your sisters. And now I just want you guys to dress up as the Archeron sisters for Halloween.
Ooh, can I be Nesta? I'll be Nesta
yes.
for this one.
Yes, you could.
Anyway, so we get Nesta's journey in the library. She's like, okay, she does start training, right? Because what does Cass figure out about Nesta?
He figures out that part of the reason she doesn't want to train is her pride. She doesn't want people to see her fail at something. Again, she has like this level of pride, this level of like not showing vulnerability to anybody, not having a weakness that she wants to hide. And so, yeah, he figures that out. And so he gets her to train in like this little training ground that nobody is around. And he's like, hey, I'll make a deal with you. We'll train. If you train for an hour, I'll give you something in return. And she's like, well, what are you going to give me? And he's like, a favor? And she's like, do you really want to owe me a favor? Like, of my choosing? And he's like, yes, I want you in the ring. Like, come on. And so they make a deal, and they both have these little tattoos on them now because she went to train with him for an hour and she stuck around for 2. And he's like, what do I owe you for the second hour? And she's like, it'll be okay. Like, you already owe me 1 favor. I don't want to like make you owe me 2.
I think a part of Nesta enjoys having this tattoo binding them together, right? I don't think she's acknowledged that ever, but I think she's like loves it because they've had ample opportunity to fulfill that bargain.
Yes. And she cares deeply about Cassian. And I think part of the reason she's throwing so much of a fit right now and like went down the rabbit hole of like sex and alcohol is because she cannot cope with how strong her feelings are for Cassian. Like, she's still stuck in this, like, I don't want to be Fae, and the Fae are bad people, and like she's wrapping her head around that that's not the case. But I think she's still stuck in, I have strong feelings for somebody that like a year ago I hated it. And so she's wrapping her mind around. And then also, again, a weakness. Loving somebody has been a weakness to her. She loved Elaine so much that is what the cauldron sought. That is how the cauldron got her to do what it wanted her to do, is attacking the person she loved. So I think she sees that as a weakness too.
I love all of the moments between Nesta and Cassian where he's just kind of bearing his feelings to her. Like the end of that bargain scene when they make a deal and he had talked about how much Nesta hated him and stuff. And she basically says, and I have never hated you, Cassian, and just like walks off because they're training now privately on the very top, like the rooftop of the House of Wind where no one ever ventures. And it kind of floors Cassian because he called her out. He was like, you were ready to die for me. You were covering my body with your own. And now you won't even like give me the time of day. And it's just, I love how communicative he is and trying to get her to open up.
I love the games they play with each other too. Like before she agreed to training with him, there was a scene where she starts flirting with Azriel and like, oh, I want you to train me. I'll go to training if you train me. And like, it's just to rile Cassian up because she knows he has strong feelings for her too. But she doesn't want to be the first to admit it. She doesn't want to be the first to like say it. And so she's riling him up knowing that she's riling him up. And the same thing with like the sex games with him. Like she's doing that knowing that she's riling him up, and he's doing it knowing that he's riling her up. And it's just so funny to watch their like games against each other.
It's funny watching these games play out, and then it's funny always seeing Azriel walk in right after it, just like the dining scene when she goes down on him under the table, and then conveniently Azriel just walks up at the tail end, like after it. What do you think there?
And there are like Cassian mentions that, oh, he's wanting to be heard right now because he could have gotten here without being heard. I go back to my Azriel as a voyeur. Like, I think he was there the entire time. And he's like, let's just see what's going on. And like, he's the chaperone. Chaperones watch. Like,
I want a POV from Azriel, like bonus content or something as all this stuff is happening. Like, we know absolutely nothing that goes on inside his mind at this point, and I just want to see it in there.
Yes. So I fully think Azriel is along for the ride too and enjoying himself.
I'm so giggly about this, but yes, I'm gonna have to agree with you. It was just the dining scene was just the nail on the coffin for me. It was so just explicitly that he was standing there waiting.
Yes, and they're Faye. You know, he heard what was happening in there if he didn't see it.
But I mean, Rhysand's reaction to the comment that you said was just like, it smells like, what is happening here? The whole place just smells like sex. He's like, he's somehow taken on this grumpy parent persona. I don't understand.
And then he asks Az like how he's enjoying being a chaperone. And I'm like, they're hinting heavily that Az like has some sort of like enjoyment out of other people's sex lives. Or maybe I'm reading too far into that, but like...
No, I feel like you're onto something there. It has to be true.
We haven't seen Az with a girl. Or a boy, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting his kicks off some other way.
It'd have to be with the way that this crew is constantly hooking up. But anyway, so politically speaking, as was kind of hinted in previous books, the mortal queens that are left, I don't know, are there like 4 of them or something? The bad ones?
Something.
Like there's a Briallyn, Vassa is still hanging out with Jurian.
And Briallyn is the one that went into the cauldron and is now super pissed because of what happened with Elaine and Nesta. The cauldron took from her, made her mortal, but made her old. And so she is pissed off. And she is going around trying to make like alliances, and Baron is making an alliance with her, which we find out through Eris. And he has promised her his like fleet or his like army. And then she's also, I think, allying with Koschei, which is the like bone carver's brother, but also the sorcerer who has Vassa.
Yeah.
Like the put the spell on Vassa. So we find out that indeed I was right, that this dude by the lake is the bone carver's brother, and he is a death god.
Very powerful one, and not nice at all.
No.
So pretty much half of the inner circle is just off doing, mission work. So you have Mor and Vallahan trying to figure out that stuff. You have Azriel doing his, spy work. And then you have Rhysand regularly meeting with Eris. And I'm so curious what
Tamlin.
This is. Yes. I'm so curious. Well, Tamlin's kind of MIA. Even Eris says. So they have a meeting at the Spring Court. It's what he pins as neutral ground. And it's so sad to me. It was kind of heartbreaking because Eris tells the story of like, oh, it's told that there's a beast roaming these lands and the estate is just not looked after or lived in at all. And no one has seen this beast. Like they think that they've had sightings of him in random places, but like Tamlin is just MIA. Like it's like he's fully embraced his just beast form.
But Rhys still visits him, trying to coax him out of that.
Yeah, do you think it's helping?
No, not at all. But he still visits him.
Maybe Rhysand was a little bit too hard kicking him while he was down, right?
Well, and there's something else that everybody's worried about that
Mm.
comes up later in the book, that they're like, we're never going to get Tamlin back. He's never going to come back.
I mean, let's just talk about it now, because Rhysand's been acting very, possessive, psycho a bit.
So we find out that there is a reason Rhysand has been taking on a parent figure role, and it's because Feyre is pregnant, and he has had her in like this little bubble of a shield for this whole book, and everybody's like, why?
What the
And
fuck?
he just keeps saying he's practicing. And we find out that the reason is actually that Feyre is pregnant, and he has gone full tilt on his protective side and like parent role, that it's not even funny.
And further, not even funny, is he finds out that the baby has wings from Magia, and Feyre doesn't know. Like, Feyre is being kept in the dark about this. I'm sure this will play out very, very well.
Well,
Feyre.
she knows a little bit, but she doesn't know how dangerous that
It's
is.
been downplayed.
I think he told her that the baby has wings, but it's been downplayed that there has not been a survivor that is a non-Illyrian who given birth to a baby with wings. Like, it doesn't happen. The pelvis is not designed to let a baby out with wings. But the Illyrian pelvis for women is designed to let a baby out with wings. And so usually it kills both baby and mother, unless they break their pelvis, and then it just kills the mother.
Birth is horrible enough.
Yes.
Coming from two moms, I'm like, this whole thing, I'm just like, oh God, no.
Which, this goes back, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to bring this up. I think I told you this, but like why the chainsaw was invented. Like, there was a TikTok video that I watched, speaking of birth being horrible, and it was like, go like search why the chainsaw was invented and do like a before and after you figure out why the chainsaw was invented. And guys, the chainsaw was invented for birth, to cut the pelvis of the woman so that the baby could come out. Like, what? Anyway.
Oh, mankind.
It's rough in the real world, and it's rough in the Illyrian world too.
Mm-hmm.
But
so understandably, Rhysand is kind of at wit's end trying to figure out a solution to this. He is asking the Seraphim. He's asking the, Illyrians. He's trying to research and figure out as much as possible to make this work, because Feyre has been instructed not to shapeshift, because that could damage or, kill the baby forming inside of her. So she is not allowed to be, messing with her form like that.
That came up during the scene where Nesta's like, well, how is the baby Illyrian? Like, she's not Illyrian, and he's only like a half, so the baby like had the chance of being a quarter Illyrian. And he's like, well, Feyre was in Illyrian form when we conceived, so the baby is technically like 3/4 Illyrian. And they're like, well, why doesn't she just shapeshift back into Illyrian form if it changes like her genetic makeup when she does that? And he's like, well, she's been told not to shapeshift because it could harm the baby. And so she can't even like shapeshift herself out of this mess.
Yeah, it's too late at this point. Like, they're too further along. And as we know, like, the female Fae only have a period like twice a year or something like that. So it's like a long time between like for that signal knowing that you're pregnant, right? So I don't know. It's not a good situation. There was like one sweet moment with this whole pregnancy thing, and that's when they kind of announced, what was going on, and Feyre made it a point to tell Nesta first. And it was so sweet. Like, Nesta kind of just shrugged off all of her resentment that she had towards Feyre in that moment, and was just like excited for her, to be Auntie Nesta.
Well, and there was another sweet moment with Nesta and shrugging off her like resentment. And that's when she heard about like the dangers to Feyre, and she's like, so she's going to die? And she was severely worried about it. And then she agreed to do the scrying for something which she was deathly afraid of and was refusing to do, because in her words, if I'm gonna have a nephew, I'm not gonna let him be born in a world where we're about to go to war again. Like, I'm not gonna do it. And so you see Nesta like opening up more to Feyre as a sisterly love, which she didn't have before.
Yes. And it's good that Nesta finally made the decision to do that of her own accord, because Amren has been pushing to just make Elaine do bones and stones to scry and figure out. And to the point of where Amren and Nesta they do not have a good relationship at all anymore. They are at each other's throats, and it's bitter. It's so bitter and nasty.
Well, Amren basically called her pathetic, like that she was living a pathetic life now. And I'm like, ouch, Amren, ouch.
Yeah. Aspirin. I just called Amren aspirin. Like maybe she's been so grumpy in this book.
I know. I mean, I get it because she just gave up like her whole being to win the last war, and we're on the verge of war again. Like, I would be grumpy too. Like, I fucking gave myself up for the first war. Like, you're on your own, bitches.
Tarot would be such a snarky high fae.
I would be Nesta. Like, Nesta would be who I am.
Especially going up and down those stairs, right? So
yes, I would let everybody know how much I hate the fucking stairs too.
When Nesta goes down the stairs and she trips and falls and starts tumbling down the stairs and ends up with like a black eye and just like totally beat up. And I think by the time she's finished climbing, like pulling herself back up the stairs, Cassian is just like waiting at the top of the stairs to tease her about it. And so she's just walking around with this black eye.
Well, and the funniest thing to me is Cassian points out that he saw her falling, and she's like, well, why didn't you help me? He's like, well, you didn't fall that far. Like, you're fine.
One of the cool things that happened in that scene, though, is it's been this big question mark on what happened with Nesta's power, right? And she used this power to like have her fingertips melt through the stone, basically. So like some step down, you see her fingertips imprinted in the stone. And so it's still there. And we know that Nesta's having these recurring nightmares and the trauma of everything that's happened. There was one scene that was so crazy that happened. You know the one I'm talking about?
The one after she scries for the first time?
Yes.
Yes. So she got nowhere on the scrying. And I'm going to backtrack and tell you what she's scrying for, because we get introduced to, in all of this, like everybody trying to figure out what's going on and who's on what side and all of that. We figure out that there are 3 more mythical like things tied to the cauldron, and that the queens and their side are after these. And they are the Trove, and they are the Mask, which gives you control of anything dead. Like, you're now like the like commander of the dead. The Harp, which allows you in any space that you want, like it'll open any door. And I have it written down, the Crown, and that gives you the ability to like basically walk into people's minds.
It's
and
like
there's
compulsion.
nothing that they can do to control it. And so that is what she is scrying for, is to find these before somebody else finds them. And then also she is kind of using the same kind of magic that she's looking for the cauldron, and then these were made by the cauldron. And so she's trying to use that kind of, I was made by the cauldron, like calls to like kind of thing. And so after the first time, she just hits emptiness. Like, she doesn't find anything, but she kind of half-assed it because she was like, I really don't want to push too far. I don't want people to like see anything, right? And so she had a nightmare that night, and she tapped into her magic. Not all of it, as Rhys said, like that was just a little thing. But she is having this nightmare and screaming, and like both Cassian and Azriel like feel something off, and they walk into her room, and she's like a light in the silver flame and can't get out. And Rhys comes in, and he's like trying to stop her with his like dark powers, right? And he's able to like help a little bit, but he's not able to like make it go away. And then little Cassian steps up, like breaks out of Azriel's hold and steps up, and he keeps calling her and like trying to get to her. and she like looks at him and then breaks herself out. And I loved that because it just showed how deep their connection was.
The wording that Sarah J Maas used in describing that lifeline, like how Nesta snapped out of it with Cassian, is very telling, you know? Like, we have nothing confirmed there, but there's been a few instances of something more being there, right?
Like, I get a very mate bond sense because, like, when he first noticed something was off, it was like he felt it down like some sort of like bond.
Yes. And I forget what scene it was exactly, but it talked about something snapping for him, and he was like, where's Nesta, blah 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 blah. So it's like that kind of language that we know is very foretelling with Sarah J Maas. But this nightmare was so bad because it was kind of this, it was almost like every worst case scenario happening for Nesta, you feel like, because she has a trauma with drowning and stuff. Like, she's already kind of leery about getting into tubs of water with fire, the snapping at sound, with people like Thomas kind of overwhelming her and, taking away agency of her own body. So it was very much that kind of scene of all of these things stacking up, and she was just like freaking out. And the power, it was like they opened the door and it's just the room was filled with this silver fire, and she was just, yeah.
And it was very cold. Like,
yes.
Not like the autumn court fire, which is warm. This was cold.
Yes.
And he, like, is this the scene where he kissed her to break her out? No, that's another scene, right?
Oh, that's a different scene. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we get, like, some nuance into her powers. And it has been told numerous times that her eyes go silver when she taps into her power. And we've also heard that she might be a god of old, like she might have like gotten god of old powers and ancientness. And it just pulls me back into Throne of Glass, where there was a god whose eyes turned silver. And I'm like, that wasn't from that world too. And she had like the power of flames.
Yes. Even the way that Sarah was describing the Dread Trove, these 4 items, they were cauldron formed, and that's why Nesta is able to scry for them and connect with them. But she also mentions that there is possibly a 4th item that has been lost too. So it's like, knowing Sarah, something is gonna happen with this unknown item. It's like a quick mention, but like, we don't know. And so all of this stuff, there were so many things in this book that kept hearkening back to Throne of Glass for me, along with like the missing Autumn Court soldiers. Remember that? It reminded of I forget what they were called in the other series. They were kind of getting possessed by these, what were they called? Volg princes and commanders and stuff, right? And the soldiers were acting really weird.
And when we do see these soldiers again, or who we think are these soldiers, they're in the like bog that one of these that the mask is in, right? And Nesta ends up finding this mask while Cassian and Azriel are fighting these soldiers. And we think that they're the missing soldiers who were acting very, very strange. And we see Nesta taking on this mask. And yeah, I do get very like, and it could be Koshe who is like making them do his will or whatever, but yeah, you get a very strong sense that they had no clue what was going on, like the soldiers didn't. They're very dead.
Didn't they mention that Koshe could communicate or like listen on the winds and stuff like that, even though he is like locked down to the lake? Doesn't it mention that he can pick up things?
Well, I don't know about that, but we do get a mention of listening on the winds from Meryl, one of the priestesses, the one that
she is weird, right? Yes. She is very suspicious.
She's like got this white hair and she's gorgeous. Reminds me of like Manon. And she is researching like the histories and the worlds and stuff. And she's researching the Valkyrie, which are like the female warriors. And she is also very like controlling. Like, we see that Gwen works for her, and Gwen is like terrified of her. And like the first forming of Nesta and Gwen's relationship was that Nesta helped her find a book by asking the house for the book, basically. And she's like, hey, if you can provide me books, can I like tell you a specific book I want? And so she does that, and she provides that book to Meryl. And Meryl figures it out, and Gwen's like, oh no, she's figured it out. She's figured it out. And Nesta's like, I don't really give a shit. Like, go away. Like, you've got the book you need. Like, leave us alone and go away. And like, Meryl's like, well, I'm the ancestor of like the god of the winds and like blah, blah, blah. And like, bow to me, basically. And Nesta's like, fuck
Bitch,
off.
I don't bow to anybody. Have you not heard about me?
Like, I don't care. And so Meryl finally is like, and Nesta like pulls her magic in, and she's like her eyes go light, and like you can sense her powers. And Meryl's like, okay, I'm gonna turn around and walk off. And all of the other like priestesses and Gwen are just looking at her like, And then that's when they all started going to the training. They're like, oh, okay, if she's like that powerful, like we're safe. Like, it'll be okay. And if she's willing to stand up to people for us, like, we'll be fine. And so she kind of got the rest of the priestesses on her side, and 3 more show up for training.
I was so proud of Nesta in this moment because she spends so much of the first part of the book trying to get them to sign up to do the training, and it's just radio silence, right? And so she starts using her wit to kind of trick Clotho into inviting Cassian down to like stop her from training in the library, so that all of the other priestesses can see how Cassian interacts with Nesta through this. And then it's so well done. Like, Nesta, she is strategic when she wants to be, when it's a cause that she cares about, right? Just like all of her interactions with Emery back at Windhaven. So you want to talk about Emery, like what she's been up to?
Yeah. So Emery, if you remember, is the like shop owner that her father died. Her father had clipped her wings, and he died in the war. And Cassian had previously purchased like all the clothes, like the winter clothes from her for the city. And she is living her life, like trying to be a shop owner. And Nesta walks in because she'd asked her about warmer clothes, right? And she walks in, and Emery is being like bombarded by her cousin Bellius, I think is how you say that. And he is basically wanting the ownership of the store because they don't believe that it should have went to a woman. Like, obviously women are worthless, right? And Nesta's like, I think it's time for you to leave. And he's like, do you know who I am? She's like, I don't give a flying fuck who you are. I think it's time for you to leave. And like stands up to him. And so her and Emery have lunch, and she finds a little bit more about her story and things. And she's like, hey, do you want to come train with us? And Emery's like, well, I'm busy, like blah, 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 blah. And she had mentioned that she can't get spices. So like her soup was kind of bland and stuff. And so Nesta, being the kind person, but also cunning person that she is, asks the house to give her spices and sends Cassian with them to like be like, hey, here's your spices. Also, do you want to come to training? And so Emery also shows up for training. And at that point, it's just Emery and Gwen who signed up after like seeing how Cassian like trained, right? And so we now have two extra people in this training session. And then after her standing up to Meryl, we end up with 5 extra people in our training sessions.
It's so cute as this little plot thread evolves because you have Gwen, and I think it's told that she's part water wraith or something like that. Like, that's why she's so lithe and graceful on her feet, you know, and her balance is so good. And so it's really interesting to see how each of the females struggle with different things. Like Emery, because her wings were clipped, she really struggles to like with her balance and doing basic things. Like, her movement is very handicapped because of not having control over them. And you also see Nesta start to get a little bit possessive because like Cassian's been having to fly, you know, Emery in. And I think Nesta has this thought that she's like, I don't know how Feyre can handle all of these people fawning over Rhysand all the time. And she starts experiencing a little bit of that. It's so cute.
Well, and we see, and not Emery, Gwen is part nymph.
That's it. Yeah.
And her mother was treated horribly. And she also had a twin sister who had webbed feet, or the webs.
Yeah.
And so Gwen talks about her in the past tense. And Nesta's like, I wonder what happened. Like, something happened.
And Gwen is the one that Az rescued from that temple village place.
Yeah, the temple that
right?
was being sacked because of the cauldron. Like, it was one of the temples that had one of the, like, legs of the cauldron.
Yeah. I'm reading through my notes. I'm like, what have we not talked about? Let's talk about how this Bog of Orid scene plays out, because while Az disappears, it's a very weird place. There's definitely an ancient magic that protects it, and there's like this mist, this fog that you cannot see through. It muffles any kind of sound, so you can get very lost very quickly there. So one moment they turn around, Az is gone. He's been shot by an ash arrow from these mysterious missing Autumn Court soldiers. So Cass goes after him. He leaves Nesta in a fucking tree in this swamp and is just like, do not leave. And I think something like half an hour passes and she just starts getting very nervous. Like, okay, something obviously has happened. She loves Cassian and she's now coming to terms with how much he means to her. So she's like, okay, I'm going to climb down this tree. And so she's like climbing down this tree and it's a boggy swamp, right? So I'm imagining all of these little raised kinds of muddy ground, but like the murkiest, filthiest, scary place ever. And so she's trying to get to the next section to go look for him. And this thing, it's like a horror movie, like The Ring or something, just starts pulling itself, crawling out of the water with its hair. It was so scary, like reading this. And she wets herself trying to like crawl away from it, and it just drags her underwater, which is traumatizing because we know how scary like the cauldron water and drowning was. So talk about this.
We also hear a story that she watched her cousin be drowned by a fae. And so she has right to be afraid of like anything pulling her under.
And this creature is a
Kelpie.
Kelpie, yeah. So one of the fae creatures, a Kelpie, an ancient Kelpie.
Yeah, and so the Kelpie basically pull you under, torture you for a little bit, and then when you're dead, they eat you. So nice, lovely thing. And this bog has been like the place that people had been burying their like soldiers and stuff. So there's also a lot of like skeletons along the bottom of this bog, which is also creepy as she's like pulling, like being pulled down, and she's like feeling these skeletons and this flesh on these bones and stuff. Yeah. It's not a feel-good moment for anybody reading it, or I'm guessing for her being there.
The Bog of Orid is very much a no man's land. They refer to it as the middle, where no one has control over it. It's just where all of these random monsters and creatures end up that no one, can really control. And it's not far from the Weaver's cottage either. Like the Weaver is in the vicinity of this Bog of Orid too. So this Kelpie drags Nesta under the water. She's feeling all these fleshy things, weapons, some armor, just bodies and bodies and bodies have fallen into this place. And the Kelpie the whole time is keeping her alive, right? So it keeps like pressing its lips to her to give her oxygen and like kissing her and just like tasting her with its disgusting slimy tongue. Like this was such a creepy moment. But her hand grabs something, like it's glowing and calling to her, and she kind of
it's like it pulls it to her.
Yes,
basically.
It's such a cool scene. And she puts on the mask, and what happens?
She controls all of those icky little skeleton bodies. And she basically has them rip that Kelpie apart. And then at the same time, Cassian and Az, we're just going to call him Kaz at this point. They are flying back and they can't find her. And then Cassian scents her in the urine and like knows it's urine. And so he's like, shit, something happened. And so he's like mad at himself for leaving her by herself. And he's like, frantic with worry. And all of a sudden you see like these like skeletons who are being controlled like rise out of the water. And like I can just imagine Cassian and Az being like, what the fuck is this now? And so they're like preparing again for battle. And Az is like finally getting some of his magic back from the ash arrow being shot. And then you see her coming out too. And they're like, and she's all afire with her powers, but also like controlling these people. And then she like just takes off the mask and she's like, hi. And all the bodies drop.
It's like Lady Death coming out of the swamp water. It was so cool. I got chills. I was like, oh yeah, you go, Nesta, you go.
So we didn't talk about the second scrying, which is how we figured out that this mask is in the bog, right? So she scryed again and she went into her powers, and even Rhys wasn't able to get to her this time. Like he wasn't able to stop her. He wasn't able to get to her. And this is where Cassian pulls her out by like basically making out with her. And he's like adding his heat to her to warm her up and trying to like bring her out. And so like at first the room like dropped in temperature when she went into her powers. And then when Cassian started trying to pull her out, like the room heated up. And Rhys is like, it was warm in here, dude. Like, what were you doing?
Yes, very cool scene. The two of them together, it's just like a match made in, I don't want to say
she's like
heaven,
an ice queen, which fits her power. And then he is like so friendly and like outgoing. He's like a little like puppy. And so he's got the fire.
And they're basically putting this mask on display, kind of like a museum, right? So it's like in this room locked away, but it calls out to Nesta. It unlocks the door for Nesta. So she's the only one that can control herself around it. It's almost like Lord of the Rings, like the ring just controlling whoever wears it. But Nesta, because she took so much of the cauldron, she can overcome its compulsion, right? So she's like the true bearer of this item. There were two survivors at the Bog of Orid, and Rhysand, Cass, and Azriel take it away to, I think it's Hewn Cities where they do all their torture stuff. But like Feyre is there in her pregnant state, and Nesta, and they talk about there being a pit in the middle of this room where they torture these things for information. So we kind of see that morally gray definitely coming out, because these are the good guys, but they are not above torturing people for information and protecting those that they love. So even though it's really not these soldiers' fault for being kidnapped and, you know, possessed or turned into whatever, they're still torturing them. And you can tell me like maybe next part too when we have Jesse on to talk about this stuff, but like it definitely reminded me of Throne of Glass, like the wyverns, because it talked about these creatures in the pit that were needing to be fed, and it talks about like their tails snapping and them just being really vicious and wild. So that's what I kept thinking about. There were just so many parallels with this in the Throne of Glass series later in that series. But yeah, I think this did end on the sex scene with there is so much sexy time in this book, but there was like one in particular, all I did was put a peach emoji for my notes. I'm like, that pretty much explains what this entire scene was. So next time we will cover the second half of the book, whether that's chapter 37 on or, 38 on, whatever. And then we'll have a special guest who has been on the show previously. During season 1, we had her for our Blood and Ash book 1 discussion. So Jessie from Jim Was Canceled podcast. So she will be joining us to talk about Silver Flames, because I think this is her favorite book in the series, possibly too, as well. So I don't know. This is my favorite book in the series. How are you feeling so far?
I do love me some Nesta and Cassian. Like, I mean, I like Rhys and Feyre, but they were just slightly boring. Like, when you compare them to Cassian and Nesta, like, there's so much fire. So
So you still think Nesta's a fiery bitch, but like in an endearing way?
I don't know if I'd go to an endearing way, but she's growing on me because she's opening herself up to caring about more people. Because before it was Elaine and only Elaine. Like, it didn't matter who else was involved. Like, but now she's opening herself up for more people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if I'd go endearing so much, but like, you're seeing more of her love for people and that feistiness and that fieriness coming out for that. And not just Elaine, because again, I get very like baby sister vibes off of Elaine, that like the world has revolved around her for a while now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would like the world to revolve around Nesta.
Is there anything specific that you're looking forward to in the second half of Silver Flames?
Well, I'm looking forward to that sex scene I was promised now.
The peach emoji?
Uh-huh. I'm also looking forward to, I have a feeling that the Trove is all going to call to Nesta, and she's going to finally be able to control her powers. And then we're going to get to see, like, I just have this envision, like, of her wearing the mask and the crown and, like, being a badass. Like, I'm calling back to, like, Elaine, or not Elaine, Aelin, and how badass she and, like, Madon and Lysandra were. And, like, I'm missing some of that badass. Like, yes, Feyre has power. It is slightly badass, but I'm missing some of that, like, I will lay you open and not give a shit about it later on.
Now that you say that, that's what I love about Nesta, because we get flashes of that Aelin and Manon and Lysandra even. I think Nesta, like the way that she played Cassian and Clotho to get everyone to sign up, that was part of that cunning that Aelin was so good at, doing things just running with a plan and leaving everybody in the dust to figure it out later. So I'm with you there.
Yes.
I'm all about it if we can get more of that. I was trying to keep my face straight and not give anything away, but I feel like I'm just getting like progressively worse at hiding.
Your poker face is failing.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, we're starting to get to a point in these series read-alongs where I'm just like, I'm so giddy and like just vibrating with enthusiasm because I want to talk about like so much.
We're on our last bit though.
I
This
know,
one, at least.
but we still have another. I mean, technically it's only a 2-book series so far until January, but we still have those books after our break.
Yeah.
But yeah. Hope you enjoyed the first half of our discussion of A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. We are nearing the end of our ACOTAR read-along, which is so crazy to me.
Possibly minus a chapter because Tara can't read. So.
I'm sorry. I might not be able to create graphics too.
No,
I might have messed up.
I re-looked at it. I can't read. Like, it says 1 through 37, and like in my brain, I'm like, oh, 1 to 37. We're good.
I mean, in your defense, if you're listening to the graphic audio version, I think they cut it into 2 parts, and part 1 ends right after 36, and then 37 is actually going to the second part too. So that might be it too. So, you know. Anywho, yeah, join us next week because we'll have Jessie on the show. We're so excited, and we're going to talk all the things. Just, I know that's why she wanted to be the second part of it, so we could just talk unfiltered about everything with the series so far. And we're going to have a good time with it. So I might have a glass of wine. Who knows? I'll get a little crazy.
Boone's Farm. just bring the bottle, Sandra. It'll be okay.
No. I have grown up since then. Thank you very much.
You will not be blushing because
sips.
of the sex scenes. You'll be blushing because of the alcohol.
It's going to be the alcohol. Yes. So until next week, we will see you then. Bye.
Bye.